To be, to become, to begin, where the river leans to the sea. To learn, to let go, to love. The world turns endless, turning me.
How much does it cost to build a lifeboat for a sinking civilization? Jim is back for episode 9, and we're done admiring the problem. We're now looking at the bill. We're talking about $1 billion proof of existence, the 3% tipping point, and why the ultimate strategy for Game B isn't charity, it's a sophisticated financial hedge against the end of the world. Enjoy the conversation. You're really, really good at strategy within the systemic constraints of a game, right? But
Try
what
to be.
about inter-game? Sorry?
Yeah, I said I try to be a good strategist. I think it is one of my superpowers.
Mm-hmm. So now, strategy depends on the rules of the game and understanding those, and they're quite understandable in let's say a game A context. And but what about strategy between games, inter-game strategy? Um, we know the tactical components like proto-bees and the membrane and all of those elements that have to come together in order to start building the bridge. But what's the actual strategy that you would bet on to transition us from game A to game B, that you believe is the most successful strategy? So where do we start?
Very, very timely. I just cranked out a long essay on that topic, which I'm not
Good.
100% pleased with, but at least it got me thinking about it in a very detailed. Did that on Saturday, so I am
Beautiful. So maybe we
pretty
find
well.
some new aspects today. Let's
Yeah,
hit it.
yeah, perhaps so. Now, first, the caveat: the transition from game A to true game B. We have to be honest. It's a long shot, right? The probability that it will work, I don't know, but it's bigger than zero, so let's go for it. So consider whatever I have to say here as a plausible trajectory, not necessarily a likely one. And I think that's always, to be intellectually honest with ourselves. What we're trying to do here is extremely difficult, and there's many failure modes, and we have to thread the needle in many interesting ways to get to the other side. So first, let's start at the other end when the flip occurs. From a fair bit of social science and social complexity science, there seems to be an indicator that once a cadre of committed people reaches 3% or so of the population, particularly when the rest of the population has lost commitment to the status quo, a flip is possible. You don't have to get to 51%. You get to 15%, and it's almost for sure that it will flip, or at least something big will happen. But that's surprising that small islands of coherence can propagate very rapidly at some inflection point, somewhere between 3 and 15, depending on how fucked up the society is. So that makes the mission a little bit less scary. You don't have to get to 15%. Get to 3%. You have some fair chance something will happen. You get to 15%, something probably will happen. So that's the other end. Now, the other constraint, and this is the big constraint people pointed out to me all the time, and that's where we came up with the idea of embryonics, is that game A is big and strong and has powerful force fields that influence people. People have been raised in it. They've been indoctrinated in the status games, etc. And how in the hell do you even get started? And so a key design parameter on how to do the transition is that you have to find ways that actually work embedded in game A, and acknowledging that they're embedded in game A, and being completely honest about what that means, right? It basically means that in many cases, you're not going to be pure game A, but you're going to be able to start to build game A and basically start to fire up the institutional personal spiral, which we've talked about before. And and particularly, I just wrote another essay yesterday, because I also wrote it on Saturday, I think, called, Membranes Have to Work, which I talk about a lot. And it does not mean that they have to outcompete game A at game A fuckery, right? It means that they have to operate as a membrane where things come in and things go out, and it maintains its health and its growth rate, etc. And so that's also a key part of the discipline. Now, I'm going to take a little sidebar here, and this is where we get to something closer to real strategy, right? When you run the numbers, trying to start let's say a proto-B, a big version of a membrane, strong version of a membrane, pretty capital intensive. It could be $20 million to fire up a decent proto-B, 50 million, maybe, depending on how luxe it is and how big it is, etc. Where's that money going to come from, right? And so one has to, again, it has to work. Not only does it have to work at the membrane level, it has to work at the metamembrane level. So there needs to be flows of resources into the big membrane, which then can be divvied out to start the smaller membranes. And you and I have talked about this a fair bit. And this is a big change from 2013 when we got started with this stuff, 2012. It now appears to be the case that a growing number of people with serious means realized we're completely fucked if we don't do something. And at least some of them have the ears to hear to allocate some of their assets into this kind of a venture. So, and the other part of this is, again, as I'm thinking strategically, on day one, let's say there's 5 strong form proto-B type game B entities that are being launched, and there's a few hundred lighter forms, babysitting cooperatives, dinner clubs, singing and dancing cooperatives, whatever, tool libraries. But then there's also tens of thousands, probably early, who become individual associates to the game A movement, right? Sign up, get an ID, etc., and maybe even agree to pay $10 a month dues or something to provide a small source of funding. Not enough, but one source. But I suspect in the short term, the big amounts of capital to start building things is going to come from philanthropic guilt tripping on rich people, particularly the younger offspring of rich people. And there needs to be a hard to capture mechanism for that money to come in, not be corrupted, and be allocated to provide realistic funding for the early stages of game B membranes. And it's very important that subsidy stop, right? So that it's not going to be, well, at least a normal on-the-ground community will need to be able to reach its own equilibrium at some point, maybe 5 years, something like that. So it might have a sloped subsidy, which starts relatively high and diminishes over time. For instance, the land might be bought for the community, but at the end of 10 years, it has to buy the land back for itself, something like that, or convert it to a conventional mortgage. Because once you have houses on it, people and businesses, a game A bank is perfectly happy to give you a mortgage on it. Or hopefully better is that there is by that point a game B financial infrastructure. For instance, I think an early entity, at least in the United States, where the laws are very favorable, as there'd be a game B credit union where people's savings and such can be used to make loans to proto Bs. But by banking regulations, they have to be decent commercial financial bets, just like any other bank. But they would understand with some nuance why a game B land mortgage is a reasonable thing to do. So that is kind of the high and the low of it. They have to work. And I see for quite a while the need for extra fuel to come in from game A, and particularly to fund the more asset intensive on the ground communities, Game B businesses, Game B infrastructure, like credit unions. They don't need a lot of capital; they need some, and so that's kind of the biggest picture. Next is we've talked about it a fair bit in the membryotics phase, which is the membranes need to self-organize into metamembranes that they, the example I often give is, all right, there's 10 agriculture-related proto-bees that are doing their thing, and they decide to create a agricultural co-op to help them sell their products, to help them buy their supplies in bulk, in many cases to Game A. And so they all become members and they develop accords. And we talked before about inheritable accords versus this level accords, which I've also written up in the last week or so. And so that this thing continues to move up. Then there would be an association of Game B co-ops, might be multiple of them. Again, one of the beauties of the fractal bottom-up nature of Game B, I should say, is that we don't have necessarily just one of anything. We have multiple of them that have grown up, and they may merge at some time or they may not. For instance, the difference between an organic only and an optional organic and a don't give a shit co-op, all three might make sense at different points of time in different places. And again, this is this concept of coherent pluralism. We're not going to be very prescriptive, and people find what works for them. And at least in these things continue to grow. Then over time, as there become initially, let's say a proto-B, so there's a very first proto-B, it's going to have to buy all its shit from Game A, basically, right? Because it will strive to be somewhat self-sufficient. But I've warned people, don't over-index on that, right? This was some of the mistakes of the hippie communes. We're going to weave our own clothes. We're going to, try to grow sugar in the mountains. No, it's probably not a very good idea. You can sort of do it, but it's not very good. So you have to be, very acute and discerning on what level of self-sufficiency is realistic. But once you get even 5 proto-Bs, they can start trading with each other. One of the very few things that's both true in economics and non-obvious is the idea of comparative advantage in trade. The math of that is actually very fascinating for anyone who wants to look into it. So that even if we're both, even if I'm worse than you are at wine versus wheat, if the ratio of my productivity in wine is higher than my productivity in wheat, it actually makes sense for me to specialize in wine and you to specialize in wheat and for us to trade. And so very quickly, inter Game A, Game B, I should say, trade should start to happen. And that will reduce the dependency on importing things from Game A. But again, don't rush it. Be practical. Make it work. And I also see the Game B membranes often working in Game A, right? No reason we shouldn't have contract programmers or AI orchestrators or artists or even I often joke, the ultimate irony would be a Game B advertising agency, right? That did Game A motherfucker things for Game A companies using the insights of people who see through the game, right? That could be extremely interesting. And for a while, I see those as probably necessary parts of the evolution of membranes so that they work. A membrane of good intentions and sweet people that doesn't work, it's just a waste of time and energy. So it's very important that the doctrine of it works be incorporated in all the time. Now that doesn't, again, I made the point earlier, that doesn't mean that they have to always work in Game A motherfucker terms. In fact, often they won't. And some activities will just be perpetually subsidized by the rest of the system. For instance, daycare in the United States in particular is ridiculously expensive. It's horrible. One could easily see a daycare guild in which daycare is highly subsidized by the entity, the maximum membrane, and made it accessible non-Game A resource that Game A communities take advantage of.
So let's take the most important numbers here. In functioning proto Bs that can create trade. Enough of those to reach 15% of the population.
Or at least 3%.
Okay, let's say 3%. And then startup cost of around 20 million for each.
Roughly.
What's the survival rate? So is it 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100 that will survive if we build a proto B with equipped with 20 million?
It better be higher than that.
Exactly.
That, it's got to be like 50% probably.
Okay.
Which requires good planning and good execution.
And how many? So 3%, or how many people do you envision in one proto B?
We nominally talk about 150, but I think that it could be bigger. I think it could be as much as 3,000, but in that range, from 50 to 3,000.
Okay, so
the proto B of 3,000 is likely to be organized as a number of sub-pods beneath that.
Okay, so 3% of the US population is around 10 million, right? So, and if we say
1,000 each, we'd need 3,000. We'd need 10,000.
So we need 10,000. We have to build 20,000. If there's a survival rate of 50%. So we need 20,000 or $200,000 million to build this. 200 billion.
200 billion. Yeah, it's probably about right. Over 80 years. Over 60 years. So
okay.
we need about 3 billion a year. And that's almost exactly what I figured what my goal would be for the external funding by year 5. About 3 billion a year, 2 to 3 billion a year. So I think that's perfectly feasible.
So that's US, right?
That's US. And it is true that philanthropy is a less well-developed thing outside the U.S. U.S. is by far the most philanthropic country in the world, partially because our government services suck so bad. But how people do it in other countries, maybe they get governments. I know the EU gives money for all kinds of crazy shit, including some Game B-ish things. There may be some government money available, etc. So yeah, 3 billion a year is probably more than we need early. At an average, and of course, keep in mind, at some point, the Game B's entities will produce surpluses. And in fact, part of the discipline of Game B is, coherent commitment to living as reasonably parsimoniously as one can while living a good life and investing the surplus in growing Game B.
Okay.
Actually,
but let's say 3 billion. How much is that in percentage of the total philanthropic spending in the US per year? Do you know?
Tiny amount. Let's see. What's the total? Let me ask Mr. Perplexity. I'm going to guess that the total philanthropic spending is probably over $100 billion. Well over $100 billion. Okay. That's Mr. Perplexity. What is the total?
Wow.
2024
was almost 600 billion.
Okay, so you got the U.S. is very philanthropic compared to any other country, and that's so we're basically talking about 0.5 of 1%.
Yeah. Okay.
Not an insane number, particularly if the mission is to save humanity, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. So, why do you think that hasn't happened yet?
I can tell you why, and it's why some of these rich people come up to me when I give little talks, is nobody has actually thought it through before. actually come up with a plausible, if not likely, plan, right? And that I think is always been the goal for Game B, and we haven't gotten there yet, but maybe we're closing in on it rapidly, where we actually will have a battle plan that a rich person looks at and says, "Okay, this might work. I'm going to back it." So far it's been eco villages, one-off eco village. Sorry, a nice thing, but what's your strategy for replication, for emergence of hierarchies such that you could actually become the social operating? I've never seen anything like it. Actually, it's kind of surprising. Unfortunately, on the progressive side, it's socialism. We know that doesn't work, right? Not, certainly not socialism sponsored by the state. That's kind of a shitty way to do anything. Radical libertarian capitalism, a la Chile, or it looks like Argentina is going down that road. I think we know for a lot of good reasons that is not likely to be a solution. So something actually new. Has the theoretical richness, or even beyond the theoretical richness, of either capitalism or libertarianism. Or socialism, capitalism, or libertarianism. It is odd. Actually, I talk about this sometimes online, that we are still in love with these 18th and 19th century ideologies, and from the very beginning, we thought of Game B as a 21st century, not an ideology, but an operating system. And so I think that will appeal to people.
So when I have these kinds of conversations, and we're looking at similar numbers with what we're working on, we encounter pushback in the sense that people's mindsets seem to be rooted in the game A extractive way of thinking and linear way of thinking, such that they have a really, really hard time to really, really, really understand what you are talking about here. So what's the most likely to succeed fundraising strategy that you would look at? Who would be the targets, and why? Why would these people be interested even in doing that? The lofty goal of saying, okay, we're saving humanity. Yeah, of course we are. But what usually the question people ask is, what do I get out of this? Because that's where they got the money, in asking, what do I get out of this?
You're specifically trying to get them off of that. And there are more and more people, as I said, particularly the second generation, who are willing to consider that. And the way I've never actually done the ask yet, because we're not ready. But I think the way I would do the ask is ask people to consider allocating 2% of their assets into Game B over some period of time, right? And as a hedge, right? Even if it's just a hedge, right? We all hedge strategies if we're financially sophisticated at all, and people with hundreds of millions and billions of dollars are generally sophisticated, or have people who are sophisticated around them, and say, this is your hedge strategy, right? Do you want the world to continue to get worse and suck for yourself and your descendants? Or is it worthwhile to have a 2% hedge into building an alternative operating system, even if it's just a standby operating system, the shit hits the fan? So I think I would start with that. In terms of where the sweet spots are, I'm not 100% sure, but there have been other people working this space, and I would reach out to them, people who convene. In fact, I actually talked to a few of them, these talks for rich people and what have you, and I will say I hear some resonance there. So I don't really have a tactical plan of a call list, right? The other thing I would point out is, much like venture capital, you'll find a psychographic difference. There's venture capitalists that love to do early stuff, right? Man with a plan, write you $100,000 check based on a 5-page business plan. And then there are other venture capitalists who aren't going to come in until the B round, when your thing's got $50 million of revenue, right? And I think we find the same thing in philanthropic support for early Game B, because there will be a cadre that's interested in coming out with smaller checks but lower thresholds, of saying yes to see what we can do. And then if we can do what we say, then they'll come back for more. Or there'll be another layer of people, probably bigger guys, who will then say, okay, you did what you could say with the first round. Now let's see if we can fund up the second round and then the third round. So I suspect that will also be part of the strategy. Though I haven't spent a shitload of time on that part yet. Though at some point somebody will have to. It may not be me. I'm not. I'm okay at that, but I'm sure there are better people at it. Especially, VC. I know how to pick their pockets, but philanthropic, okay. But there are probably better people at that than I. But I would say that the psychographic, early in smaller checks versus later in bigger checks, and then just like VC. You got to prove something, right? So let's say we fund up enough for 10 proto Bs, right? People have to, I do think this is a huge part of it. Up till now, Game B's been mostly talk. There's been a couple little attempts, none of them, all of them premature in my opinion. But when real proto Bs are built and the other lighter membranes, it's important to always not over-index on proto Bs. Then to be able to show them 2 or 3 years later to people, this here, go visit, hang out, spend a weekend, stay at their Airbnb, and see that this is a qualitatively different thing that these people are doing. And it's not perfect yet, and it has its issues, but it's there. And as the existence proof gets stronger and stronger, the ask gets easier and easier. And further, the recognition in society that something is happening, right? That when you get out to maybe 100 proto Bs, you start getting feature articles in the New York Times or the whatever the German equivalent is about what's going on here. There are tens of thousands of people living in a new way, and they seem really like they like it, and their recruitment into their membrane is at a surprisingly high rate into their membranes, and new membranes are forming at this rate. Of course, we'll feed them the story to some degree, and hey, just extend that exponential, and what happens?
So the proof of existence would happen by, let's say, picking 2 or 3 bioregions in which 10 proto-Bs are attempted to be established. A failure rate of 50%, meaning trying to like 2, 3, or 4 bioregions with 20 proto-Bs each to be built. So that's already 1.5–2 billion that are needed for just proof of existence.
Probably about 800 million, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So all right. So the first step, the absolute first step, because proof of existence seems to be an important step, is
I think it's huge. I think that is the first big phase transition from talk to walk, right? Is that
okay? But that's a billion, right? That's a billion. So getting to 1 billion, because anything below that will likely end up in the opposite of what is the desired outcome, which is it's a proof that it's not working, right? Because if you don't aim high enough, you will fail, and then people will just put that in the drawer and say, okay, that's a failed experiment.
Yes.
So it has to work.
That's why I have been so reticent to launch, right? Wait until the story needs to be complete first, then the funding needs to be in place, then you launch.
Okay. So the
probability of success.
Funding phase 1 is 1 billion, or roughly a billion.
It's probably a phase 0, which is to build the first 2 or 3, right? Just because you want to do a prototyping phase first, right? To learn things about governance, about onboarding, about selection of people, etc. So I would probably start with a prototype for learning, and then once we have learned enough, then propagate out as quickly as we can to multiple bioregions, to 10 bioregions of 10, would we come up with 10 bioregions of 10 each, or 5 bioregions of 10 each, something like that. And
which learnings would you say are missing? Because I see many eco-villages, intentional communities all over. There's been a lot of learning happening. What would you say is missing that needs to be explored?
I think that there's a bunch, and the different eco-villages seem to have missing various pieces. I think one is a rigorous screening mechanism for who you bring in. Some of the eco-villages do that, I know, but others don't. I think having well thought through governance modalities is a classic failure mode, where either a cult leader captures the villages, happens quite often, or it becomes extremely bad at making decisions and tends to lapse into a basin of mediocrity. And I think, finding the line between those two things of a cult leader and group consensus mediocrity is going to be a key part. I think the failure modes we don't have. Oh, I think a key one, and maybe the most important, and I know little about this. Fortunately, I know a couple of people who claim they know something about it, but this would be a side effort that would need to become good, is how do you realistically start to deprogramming people from their game A baggage, right? What practices, what maybe changes in diet, what changes in status games, media consumption, what is it that we should commit to within these membranes to help people shed their game A baggage and become more game A individuals in the institutional personal development spiral that allows them to move up the hierarchy of well-being and ability to work together in new institutions. So I think that's going to be a key skill. Not my skill. Somebody else needs to deal with that for damn sure. And I think that will be interesting and important.
So, how many parallel experiments in phase 0?
You're kind of breaking up there.
How many parallel experiments in phase 0 would you say we need?
3 to 5. 5 is probably a good number.
Okay. So 100 billion to start, running for 5 years, and then another billion must be in place.
Probably about 3 years, right? If we can't figure it out in 3 years, we're not going to figure it out. So 3 years, and then ramp to a billion in another 3 years, maybe.
And then to a continuous flow of around 3 for 80 years.
60 years, yeah.
60 years. Okay, why 60?
Basically, 3 generations and 2.5, 3 generations. I think it takes that long to fully enculturate Game B. So I don't think you'll see real Game B players until the 2nd generation, and then you'll see advanced Game B players in the 3rd generation.
So far we've been talking about the assumption of doing that in the US. Now, as the US is turning into a kingdom, this might not be the best place to do this at this point in time. Where in the world do you think is the optimal place to do this?
I think the U.S. is probably the optimal place because it has strong freedom. The legal right to do what you want in the U.S. is way higher than it is in any other major industrial country. You don't need permits. Yes, they fuck with you in various ways, but nothing like in Europe, right, where you can't fucking wipe your ass without a permit from the government. India, the same, to a substantial degree. And so the U.S. history of freedom, I think, is quite important. But outside the industrial world, the advanced countries, there may be some real opportunities because people don't have much, right? They have more willingness to take a chance. You and I have talked about this. I think Africa is interesting in that Africa is coming up very rapidly. People don't realize that many of the African countries are growing 8 or 10% a year, but they're running into very serious problems, particularly around corruption, where the membranes in these countries are very corrupt and are very big man oriented. And Game B could provide an antidote to that, where people can, build entities that are not corrupt, that are not susceptible to big manism, which seems, again, a very strong African leitmotif of social organization. There's also a huge surplus of people in many African countries, particularly young people, particularly well-educated young people, who there are not really decent jobs for. And so that might be very interesting. Latin America, I don't know. I don't really know anything much about what's going on the ground there, what the attractors are. I mean, Latin America is far richer than Africa, but it also has lots of issues and problems, and it also is very often subject to big manism, coups and military takeovers and dictators of various sorts. I just I don't know enough about it to know if Latin America would be another opportunity. We did have some conversations early with some indigenous people in the United States, and they were interested. The Iroquois Federation, for instance, were quite interested. So they would be some folks to talk to. And in U.S. and Canada, they have quite substantial legal rights to do their own thing, outside the regulations of zoning and health departments and what have you. So those could be either locations for early proto-bees, or they could actually be sources of people to come into proto-bees. And in some ways, the indigenous people are less programmed to Game A than the settler people are. So having some indigenous people in the mix could actually be a really good thing. Pick up on their collective wisdom over the millennia and their less strong alliance to the Game A games.
Well, to increase the odds,
start in the U.S. Go ahead.
Or maybe on 3 continents, U.S., Africa, and Australia, just to increase the odds.
Yep. As for the first 5, that might well make sense. For the first 1, obviously, you have to pick someplace.
Yeah, of course. But also the cultural and bioregional differences between those places might play a role in how the governance principles shape up, etc. Right? So getting more diversity in from the beginning, it could be a good thing.
Yeah, I certainly think when we're doing multiple, the first phase 1 as opposed to phase 0, getting diverse places to experiment is valuable. We may discover that certain places just don't work, right? That those places aren't ready yet for whatever reason, or they have immune system reactions which crush us, right? So experimenting with that relatively early, I think, is important.
Yeah, that would be my next question, right? The immune system reaction. Once Game A discovers that the probably most relevant resource for Game A, which is the consumer, is being sucked out of Game A into something new, then Game A might revolt against that, right? And might not like that very much. How do you protect against that?
It's funny. Some of the very earliest Game B people were very paranoid about that. I thought it was ridiculous. We had 35 people. I don't even know we exist. I guarantee it, right? And but at least one person was convinced that the CIA was going to come in and kill us all at one of our meetings. So just for fun, I stuck a big pistol in my bag, my briefcase next to me, and I showed it to this particular person. I said, "All right, guy comes to the door. I'll at least take out the first motherfucker." And I thought there was zero chance. And the reality is that we are, it's part of our weakness, but it's also part of our strength, right? We're tiny. We're just yet another group of cranks out there. And I'll give you a parallel example. In the early 70s in the United States, there was the so-called Back to the Land movement, where a bunch of young people bought or rented farms in remote areas. In fact, my farm was a hippie commune that failed, that we bought from the last communard. Of course, it was the one that had the trust fund. And there was, it's thought somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 young people went back to the land during that window. Almost all of them failed. A few still exist, not many. And it was thought to be an interesting curiosity. And, it was written up in the leading weekly magazines and what have you. But the state felt no desire, there felt no inclination to try to suppress it, particularly so long as they, maintain themselves within reasonable legal bounds. And in fact, in general, they cut them a fair bit of slack. And, they want to smoke dope all day. Oh, well, right. They didn't raid them or anything. So I think that people that think about the Game A backlash, if it does happen, it's going to happen later. Exactly. Probably after there's at least 1 million.
Yeah, but that's that's still when there's no kinetic power in those 1 million people. And
again, another reason why with the U.S. is good is we can have kinetic power, right? If you have, I've always assumed that every proto-B would also be organized as a militia and would be well armed, right? So, not to mean that we could stand up against the army, but we could stand up against local hooligans and people trying to invade us during hard times, etc. 150 people, with legal weapons in the United States is a formidable force.
Of course, but so just against the immediate surroundings, not against the state, right? So if the state decides that this is, sorry.
Yeah, I said, go ahead.
If the state decides to put an end to that experiment at one point, then they can. So what is the best strategy to deal with this?
Yeah, for again U.S. centric, because that's what I know. I've written an essay on this too, called "Strict Legality," which is that from the very beginning I have put forth as a standard for Game B that even though it will slow us down in ways, we must always operate in strictly legal fashion. It would be very nice to cut corners around zoning rules and health department rules about what you can do when you build it, when you build a house and all this stuff, but don't give them the stick to hit you with. And depend, at least for the time being, on the rule of law in the U.S., which is still pretty strong. Notice even Trump backs down when the Supreme Court tells him he can't do something. And so long as the rule of law persists, if you're operating with strict legality, backed up if necessary with some force, then I think you can go pretty far. Now, it is true that there could be a push comes to shove phase where, for whatever reason, the state decides this is a sufficiently dangerous alien invasion that it attempts to suppress it. I don't know exactly how we win that one. I think being prepared for asymmetric warfare would be good. Having some good hackers that can take down the grid, things of that sort. Alliances with other people, with other groups, because I suspect by the time we have 1 million people, which would be out quite a ways, there'll be plenty of other people who are also sick and tired of the status quo. And, we may be able to, have allies. But it's a question, and I don't have a solid answer. But strict legality, I think, gets us a long way, at least in civilized places.
What would be the right moment to turn this into a political platform and equip one candidate with enough money to win the presidency on that political platform?
It's not clear that it'll ever happen. I do think that the political interventions that will happen first will be at the local level. If you have, even let's say 10 proto-Bs at 1,000 each, 10,000 voters, that's a shitload in every rural county in the United States, enough to win every election, probably. Even 1,000 voters is enough in lots and lots and lots of places to swing local elections. So getting friendly politicians in at the county commissioner level, at the city mayor and city council level, I think is where you start. And then you start repealing the restrictive zoning laws and building codes and health department rules. For instance, health department rules in most United States forbid composting toilets, even though it's probably a good way to handle human waste in a closed economic loop, or closed chemical loop, actually. So I would say that you'd start with local, where you have voting strength, and then work out to, in the United States, we have the three levels. We have the counties, the states, and the national. You may get at some point a big enough concentration in a given state to be able to start to at least elect some legislators, and they can push forward with some of our ideas. When you're at 3%, that's possibly enough to swing national elections. Probably is, in this very close environment that that we're in the U.S. today, between Team Red and Team Blue. But even getting to 1% is going to be way out there. It's going to be 40 years probably. So I do not put national politics on the agenda, really. And if it turns out that there's a opportunity, great. But I think we need to have a strategy that does not count on conventional politics for the first national politics for the first 40 years. Instead, you build up from the bottom.
You build up from the bottom, but at one point where it might be very, very useful to have that asset on the national level in order to prevent any lashback from Game A on a larger scale, right? Even if you have a lot of bottom support, might still be that the centralized powers that be don't want this thing to happen and can just shut it down.
It's true. So that may be an argument for relatively early getting a 1 or 2 congressmen in, for instance. Or in truth, if we're small to middle in size, 1 million people, we probably can't get our own people in, but we can get in people that are sympathetic to us, right? Say, all right, we're 5% of the voters in your congressional district. 5% is enough to swing the election, people. We will vote for you if you agree to X, Y, and Z, and be sympathetic at least to our cause in the halls of power. And again, we're all doing this. Think about it. We control but we have friendly people in the county councils in 100 counties across the United States. We have 2 or 3 governors that are sympathetic. We have maybe 1 or 2 Congress critters. Pretty hard to repress an organization like that, at least as long as the U.S. does not become a dictator, which is, it's a little bit of a, dicey situation. I personally don't think it will. I think that the U.S. governance structure is robust enough that it will survive the king of shit himself, and will spring back to a better place after he's gone. But I could be wrong. If it does devolve into something closer to a dictatorship, then we may have to adjust our strategy.
Well, the objectives of Project 2025 are 50% done so far. There's a Project 2025 tracker .com that you can look at, and when that thing is successful, then there will be a de facto king. So let's see.
Real. 2025 doesn't actually argue for a king, but it does argue for a dangerously centralized presidency.
That's what I mean.
The 2026 elections are going to be very interesting to see if the American people still adhere to their deepest values. If they vote out the Republicans in both the House and the Senate, that will be a good sign. The current betting says they'll vote them out in the House, which is a help, but not in the Senate. We shall see. But if they don't, then I could move towards the more pessimistic side of things, particularly just the crazy shit from these people. My God. But it's, again, we have one of the things about the Game B trajectory, the development curve, is it's got to adapt to events as they occur. We turn out to be somehow a right-wing Christian nationalist dictatorship, soft dictatorship, then we'll have to take somewhat of a different strategy.
So then, in order to organize this, so there needs to be, let's say, phase 0, 200 million, phase 1, 1 billion. There needs to be some way of organizing this. What is the organizational structure that makes this happen?
At least the current thinking, and I'm talking to some folks about this now, is to start a Game B foundation within the outer membrane that takes the first tranches of money and allocates them out to the membranes using some relatively non-capturable, relatively democratic mechanism for approving projects. But very important to allow multiple such foundations to exist, right? So that you don't have single choke points on funding. They may have quite different perspectives. There may be a foundation that wants to create very traditional entities, or maybe another one that's looking to do very radical ones, or maybe ones that want to do Christian themed ones, and so a foundation, essentially, multiple foundations relatively quickly, is how I see the first set of moves to build some structure to do this, and then they will fund. One of the things you and I have not yet talked about, and it's kind of coming up soon in my writing, is the information space, right? One of the things that's very important is building a horizontal information space so that the various membranes can learn from each other and can put their learnings up online. All their accords go online. There's communities of practice for lots of different things. There are ways for people to meet each other. There's ways for people to organize across the globe in ways that are not exploitive and not extractive. That's going to be a very important part of the Game B build out relatively early. And the language I often use is its intent is to lower the activation energy for things to occur. So you think you're a proto B, some people want to start a proto B, they really don't know where to start. They can go out and look at, say, the 5 most successful proto Bs, see how they're doing it, right? Take their governance model and say, well, it's pretty close, but I want to change this, and this. And then they post that back as a fork of the governance model of the community they think they're most like, and say, this is what we think of a governance model. Please critique this. Tell us what you think we got wrong on this. And then the infosphere of Game B people looks at their new proposed governance modality and gives some feedback. Some of it may be useful, some of it may not be. And then the group, modifies their governance accords accordingly, and then launches, as an example.
So this presents a serious attack vector, right? Because this is central and important. How would you architect that software layer such that it can be resilient against attack?
I am no longer an expert in this shit. I used to be a top world expert in it, so I'd have to defer to people who are. I know some people involved with Blue Sky, for instance, and the AT protocol and underneath that. And I would have to delegate that to people who have current knowledge on how to do that. But again, part of it is going to be membranes, right? Don't let people in that we don't want in. You have to actually be a signed up Game B member to participate. That the various online membranes will have their own immune systems if people try to come in spam or act bad, they throw them the fuck out, right? By some reasonable process. So all those kinds of things need to be built in. We have a lot of learning about what could work in online information spaces, but unfortunately, they've all been corrupted by the advertising-driven attention hijacking model. In this case, no ads, or if there are ads, they're only on-demand ads. You say, I'm interested in buying a new camera, and it'll show you some shit about new cameras if you ask for it, but nothing put in your face.
Well, that's
eventually.
That's the top layer, but I'm also talking about the absolute bottom layer, the ground layer, which is the physical layer, right? Even if you distribute something like that across multiple data centers, that's easy to take out. So there needs to be something that's truly distributed.
Yeah, though, of course, we've talked about this before. And doing fully distributed is really expensive in many ways and difficult. And whether we start with that or not, I don't know. It may be that having, 6 copies in 6 different jurisdictions may be a better way to start. Actually, I have thought about this a fair bit, but I don't have. Again, I would defer to the experts who are at the cutting edge on this stuff. For instance, if you have fully distributed architectures, it's difficult to do search and find stuff, at least in real time. Now, you can have search servers, which are derivative of the distributed servers, but that gets complicated, and that becomes another point of attack, right? Because search servers could be taken down. So you got this. This is a really hard design problem to balance theoretical lack of capture from performativeness and the features that people need to actually make it worth doing. And so far, every single truly distributed system has failed because it can't produce enough functionality.
Well, you can always have backups in a truly distributed form that can be used to spawn new instances.
Yeah, that might be the best one. I often talk about the fact that crypto ledgers are a good place for auditing, right, or for safe store, and that may be it. That the say 6 regional servers are constantly spooling off their content to fully distributed architectures, and then if someone does capture the all 6 of the servers, then it can be restored from a crypto ledger. That just thinking out loud here, but people know a lot more about this, need to figure this out. But I would warn people away from overcommitting to fully distributed because you won't get enough performative features to get people to use the system. It's very hard to get people to create a new nexus of attention. When I say nexus of attention, I'm talking about things like email, text messaging, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. There's only a handful of them in people's lives. And if you don't become a nexus of attention, especially in our current world that has gotten so good at attention hijacking, it's hard to become a serious force. And being a nexus of attention means it's got to be easy enough to use and provide enough value. And that's really, really, really hard in a fully distributed environment.
And what about the foundation? So some design principles that optimize in that foundation towards actually fulfilling what it's supposed to be and avoiding any internal hijacking. What are some design principles like termination and things like that?
I think that that needs to be carefully thought out. I think eventually, relatively soon, those people should be appointed from below through some flow-up process of signaling. Their terms should be, again, terms is interesting because I've been on a lot of boards, and if you turn over too fast, you lose institutional knowledge. If you turn over too slow, you become ossified and potentially subject to capture. So tuning the terms of office, etc. Though I actually like the Forrest Landry red button approach. Maybe you have sub entities that appoint people to the board, but they can recall them at any time, right? It turns out that they're a good citizen. They can be on there for 9 or 12 years, right? Turns out that they're not doing what the lower level subsidiary entity wants them to do. Press the red button, recall them, have a new election. But I think that's going to be very important. Though, of course, as I mentioned, fork is also a very important part to build in, so that let's say one of the foundations does go bad. All right, fork it. So now there's Foundation B, which has better organizing principles and brings in a new board, and the best fundraisers start raising money for Foundation B rather than Foundation A. So I think we have to look at all these various tactics, because one of the things we know is humans are not perfect, and particularly people who were raised in Game A are going to have some Game A attributes, and we have to be able to defend against that.
Mhm. So one way of dealing or putting in a termination, implicit termination, it could be to make it easy to reinstitute fully, right? So
For instance, put a 10-year life on it, and then have a rule that whatever money is still in it at the end of 10 years is passed off to a new entity.
yeah, a forced.
Again, I would make these things fluid, because I don't think we know yet what the right parameters are.
Yeah, a forced governance jubilee every couple of years by terminating the organization and having to reinvent it could be an interesting modality. Okay. So you have to go soon. I know you have something in your calendar in 10 minutes, 9 minutes. So let's not open another can of worms and wrap it up here for today. But that was a lot of fun. Any closing thoughts you have that we haven't mentioned?
Basically that there's three tensions, actually. Getting to an endpoint that can actually win. They're starting tiny in the belly of the beast. And then there's the need to provide enough hope to grow exponentially for a long time, and at a pretty ridiculously high rate. Calculate roughly 16, 17% a year. And 17% a year, venture companies do that all the time, but social movements, pretty rare, right? Especially when you get to the outer years. So building in a culture of exponential growth is going to be very important. That this does not lapse into eco-village, okay, this is good enough for us, but it's not impacting the wider world. So I'd say those are the three design tensions in the overall trajectory.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, and one other thing that we didn't talk about.
Okay.
This is important. I actually wrote this up fairly recently, too, not a couple of weeks ago. I don't think that the growth will be continuous. I think there will be crises of Game A,
Yeah, of course,
which produce osmotic pressure where people will want to come to Game B, and Game B will be constrained on how many of them they can take in, but should be doing some planning such that it can surge its take-in capacity during crises in Game A. So we might go from a phase change from 10,000 people to 100,000 people in 2 years, right? Let's say the big debt burst, which is coming one of these days, right? And then the first really bad climate change event could be another osmotic pressure event where we could surge by a factor of 5 or 10. So we should not assume that it will be continuous. It'll be a lot like biological evolution, where things kind of go along at a slowly growing rate, but then they discover something new, or the environment changes, and then they move into a whole new regime and are able to grow very fast for a short period of time, and then things settle down again. Punctuated equilibrium is the term that the evolutionary biologists use for that phenomenon. So I think that's another key part, and that Game B should always be aware that these crises will occur, but when they'll occur, by complex systems definition is significantly unknown. But you can probably count on there being 2 or 3 during the 60-year period.
Mm-hmm. And being aware of them, being prepared sufficiently, even though you don't know when they are going to occur, so that they can be used as a force for good rather than a drain of energy, right? Okay, good. That was fun.
I think that's really that was good. And I got a good one for next time.
All right.
It'll be a little bit more freelance because this is the one
Okay.
piece we've never truly confronted, but I'm starting to think about it, which
And that
is
is?
Game B economics. What does Game B economics actually look like at the point where much of the economic activity within Game B entities is within Game B? We've talked a lot about it. There's lots of bits and pieces of ideas, but no one's ever pulled it together into a comprehensive view. And I'm going to attempt to do that in the next week with Megan.
Wow.
And
Cool.
we shall see. I may have to withdraw from that. And I say, whoops, didn't get there. But that's one I would like to dig into either the next one or the one after that.